The room is swallowed in shadow. Only a wavering candle flame cuts through the darkness, joined by the faint, silvered glow of the moon slipping through the window. Before us on the desk rests an ancient volume. Its leather cover is cracked and brittle, its pages the color of old bone. This is no ordinary book. You won't see it in universities or on the shelves of historians. It is a collection of terrors, warnings whispered across generations, pages filled with stories people told when their fires dwindled to embers and the night pressed against their doors. As we lift the cover, a breath of dust and earth rises, and on the first page, in fading ink, one word appears: vampire. For as long as humanity has buried its dead, it has feared the possibility that the dead might claw their way back, that a body might rise again, unrested, hungry, desperate for the living. But in the 18th century, in a small Serbian village named Medvegia, these fears transformed from folklore into something far more chilling. A soldier called Arnold Paole returned home troubled, claiming he had once been cursed by a vampire in Greece. When he died, the villagers laid him in the ground, and yet, only weeks later, people swore they saw him again. What followed became the first recorded vampire epidemic, a wave of hauntings, mysterious deaths, and exhumations so disturbing that Austrian officials documented the events in meticulous reports, describing corpses as if they were still alive. The vampire was no longer a fireside legend. It had become a case file. Before we turn deeper into this story, I want to ask you something. If you believe these shadowed myths, these forgotten pieces of history, these strange fragments of the human past deserve to be remembered, if you believe the darkness holds stories too important to lose, then you can keep this archive alive by liking this video and subscribing to the Midnight Archives. Your support keeps this candle burning and allows us to continue opening the sealed pages of folklore, history, and the unknown. Tonight, we open the Vampire File. We will trace Arnold Paole's path, from the strange curse he claimed to carry to the shocking exhumation that terrified his village, from the panic that spread through Medvegia to the reports that shook Europe. This is not only the tale of one man, it is the story of how the vampire, the most enduring of all monsters, was born. Welcome to the Midnight Archives. The early 18th century was a brutal era for anyone living in the borderlands of Europe. Medvegia, tucked into the rugged countryside of present-day Serbia, was not a place of comfort or plenty. Though technically under Habsburg rule, imperial power barely reached this far. Wars with the Ottoman Empire had left borders unstable, soldiers marching through villages, fields destroyed, and families rebuilding with whatever scraps remained. Life in Medvegia was harsh, winters bit deep, food was scarce. A family could spend months preparing for the cold, only to have their provisions rot or their animals fall to sickness. Wolves roamed the forests, but even wolves were not the greatest threat. The worst dangers were invisible. Fevers, plagues, infections that turned a small wound into a death sentence, a cough that could empty a household in a week. Death was not a stranger, it was a daily presence. And death shaped the landscape. The village church always stood beside its graveyard. These burial grounds were not the manicured cemeteries we know today. Graves were shallow. Coffins, when there were coffins at all, were rough wooden boxes hammered together quickly. In winter, when the ground froze hard as stone, bodies were placed into earth barely deep enough to hold them. The poor were buried with almost no ceremony. A prayer, a cross, a thin layer of soil. For Medvegia's people, the graveyard was a place of mourning, but also of fear, because the dead did not always rest. Across Eastern Europe, one belief lingered stubbornly. Some people, after death, rose again. These restless
visited them in the night. One man confessed that Paole appeared at his window, his face pressed against the glass. Another said the dead soldier climbed onto his chest and choked him in the dark. Both were dead within days. In a village already steeped in belief, these stories were not doubted, they were confirmation. Fear spread through Medvegia like wildfire. Doors were bolted, animals were watched, families whispered of curses. And the graveyard became the heart of their dread. If Paole had returned, the cure was known. It had been known for generations. He must be exhumed. Exhumation was not rare in such cases. Across Eastern Europe, countless records describe villagers digging up suspected vampires. Bodies showing unnatural signs, skin too fresh, blood at the lips, limbs flexible, no rot. Today, we understand these as normal processes of decomposition. Gases bloating the body, fluids forced from the mouth, skin darkening, muscles relaxing after rigor mortis. But to villagers with no knowledge of decay, these were unmistakable signs of vampirism. So, one night, under torchlight, they gathered at the cemetery. They dug through the packed earth above Paole's coffin. When the lid was pried open, what they saw confirmed every fear. Arnold Paole's body was shockingly intact. His skin looked warm and ruddy. His limbs were not stiff, and, worst of all, his mouth was smeared with blood. The villagers recoiled in horror. This was the proof. He had been feeding. No time was wasted. A sharpened stake was driven straight through his chest. Witnesses claimed the corpse let out a groan, a sound likely caused by gas escaping, but to them, it was the cry of the undead. The body was dragged from the coffin and thrown onto a pyre. Flames devoured it until nothing remained but ash. The village believed they were free. For a brief moment, life seemed normal again. Livestock stopped dying. The sick regained strength. People dared to sleep through the night. But fear never truly leaves a place where dread has rooted itself. And soon, the deaths began again. More villagers wasted away. Animals died without explanation. This time, Paole could not be blamed. He had been reduced to ash. But the villagers had an answer. Paole, they believed, had fed on others before his destruction. He had infected them. Those he touched in life or death had become vampires themselves. The ritual was not complete. The village had killed only the first. Now more waited beneath the soil. Fear swallowed the community whole. Doors stayed barred even in daylight. Children were kept indoors. No one walked alone. The villagers returned to the graves. More coffins were dug up, more corpses inspected. And what they claimed to find spread terror far beyond Medvegia. Bodies undecomposed, lips red with blood, faces flushed, limbs flexible, eyes appearing open. Each one, the villagers said, had risen at night. The rituals were performed again and again. Stakes, beheadings, burnings. Dozens of bodies were destroyed in a matter of weeks. Imagine living through this. Every illness a possible sign, every death a potential new monster. Every night, a battle against unseen horrors. To the people of Medvegia, this was not superstition. It was survival. But the panic grew beyond anything the villagers could control. Stories spread outward. Travelers carried tales of the horrors in Medvegia to neighboring villages. Fear rippled across the region. And eventually, the panic reached the ears of the authorities. The Habsburg Empire could not ignore it. Peasants mutilating corpses, entire villages consumed with terror. This was no longer a folk belief. It had become an imperial problem. Officials would soon arrive. Doctors, military investigators. And when they opened the graves for themselves, they documented what they found with cold, clinical precision. Those reports would terrify Europe, and they would change the history of the vampire forever.
The vampire panic in Medvegia spiraled far beyond anything its people could contain, and soon the Habsburg authorities could no longer ignore the chaos unfolding in their borderlands. Entire communities were tearing open graves, mutilating corpses, and burning bodies in broad daylight, convinced they were fighting a plague of the undead, an image that threatened the empire's sense of order. Determined to restore control and understand what was happening, officials dispatched military surgeons and investigators to the region. Their task was simple in theory: examine the situation, catalog their findings, and impose rational authority over the fear consuming the countryside. But when these officials arrived and began opening the graves themselves, they were confronted with sights that shocked even trained medical officers. Bodies that should have been rotting were inexplicably preserved. The dead lay with ruddy complexions, supple limbs, and mouths stained with what looked like fresh blood. Some corpses, when pierced with stakes, released gas with a sound that the investigators described as a groan. These findings, instead of debunking the villagers' beliefs, inadvertently confirmed them. The officials documented everything: the state of the bodies, the rituals performed, the number of exhumations, and their reports were written in the clinical, authoritative language of the empire. It was these documents that transformed local panic into international terror.
The Austrian reports had done more than record a strange village panic. They had unintentionally validated it. By writing down what the villagers believed and describing the corpses exactly as they found them, the investigators gave shape and authority to fears that had existed for centuries. But to understand why these fears were so powerful, we have to look back at the beliefs that came long before Arnold Paole. The word vampire was just beginning to spread across Europe in the 18th century, yet the idea of restless, hungry dead was ancient. Among Slavic communities, the notion that a corpse could return to trouble the living was deeply rooted, expressed through countless names and variations: Upgur, Nosferatu, spirits that refused to stay buried. In Greece, the same creature appeared as the Rykolakas, a bloated, red-faced corpse that wandered streets at night. Germany spoke of the Naxerer. Though the names differed, the core belief was always the same: the dead were never entirely gone, and if something disrupted their path to rest, their bodies could rise again. In Serbia, where Medvegia lay, the fear of a bad death was especially strong. A person who died violently, who carried an unresolved curse, who lacked proper burial rites, or who was foreign to the land could easily become one of the restless dead. Arnold Paole's story fit every category. He had been cursed by a vampire in Greece, he had smeared himself with grave blood, and he had died suddenly in an accident, without warning, without preparation. To the villagers, this made him almost destined to return, and so they guarded themselves with ancient rituals. Archaeologists today uncover graves throughout Eastern Europe with stones pinned to chests, sickles laid across throats, bricks wedged into mouths to keep corpses from biting, coins placed beneath tongues, even bodies buried face down so if they rose, they would claw deeper into the earth rather than up toward the surface. These practices seem violent to us now, but to the people who buried their dead in fear, they were measures of safety, not cruelty, but defense. When Paole and the others were dug up, everything the villagers saw convinced them their beliefs were true. Bodies that looked too well preserved, lips stained with blood, skin that appeared flushed, corpses that seemed to groan as stakes pierced them. Every detail matched the warning signs passed down through generations. And although today we understand that all of these signs are explained by natural decomposition, gas expansion, fluid purge, muscle relaxation, slow decay in sealed coffins, the villagers had no such knowledge. They saw not biology, but danger. To them, this was not death's work, it was the undead. Another powerful piece of folklore declared that vampirism spread like a disease. The dead who fed on the living could infect their victims, who would then rise after death to continue the cycle. This belief is the key to understanding why the panic grew so quickly. Every illness became suspect. Every funeral became a potential new threat. When Paole's supposed victims were exhumed and appeared just as lifelike as he had, the villagers saw not coincidence, but proof that the curse had multiplied. What began as a single suspicious death erupted into a full epidemic, not of corpses, but of conviction. When Austrian surgeons later documented these events, they wrote in the language of science. They described what they observed – blood in the mouth, supple limbs, fresh organs, without the context of decomposition we take for granted today. Their reports did not say, "The villagers think these are vampires." They said, "We found bodies in this condition." And because these words came from imperial officials, stamped and sealed, they carried immense weight. Readers in distant cities did not imagine frightened peasants around a fire. They imagined trained doctors witnessing the impossible. The vampire crossed from folklore into documented fact. This collision, old beliefs, misunderstood biology, and official authority created something powerful. The vampire was no longer just a creature of the graveyard. It had stepped into European consciousness. The fear born in Medvegia now spread far beyond its borders, shaping how people across the continent understood death, disease, and the possibility that the dead might not sleep quietly beneath the ground. Graveyards of Serbia. The panic that began in the graveyards of Serbia did not remain trapped in those small, isolated villages. Once the Austrian reports were copied, translated, and passed between courts, scholars, and churches, the vampire leapt from folklore into the heart of European thought. Pamphlets spread the details far and wide. Newspapers repeated the grisly accounts word for word. Suddenly, the vampire, once a bloated corpse feared only by peasants, became a topic of debate in universities, salons, and even royal courts. Philosophers like Voltaire mocked the idea, yet in doing so amplified it. Clergy debated whether such creatures could exist within Christian doctrine. Physicians published arguments attempting to interpret the reports through the limited medical knowledge of the time. The vampire also produced Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Polidori's tale reshaped the monster entirely. His vampire, Lord Ruthven, was not a corpse crawling from a shallow grave. He was elegant, aristocratic, seductive. moving through high society with charm and cold cruelty. This was a turning point. The vampire had become a gentleman predator, a monster hidden behind manners instead of mud. Fear shifted from the graveyard to the drawing room. Then, in 1872, Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla brought a new and haunting form of the vampire into literature. A beautiful young woman who preyed on another girl in a relationship filled with mystery, intimacy, and forbidden desire. Carmilla gave the vampire an eerily sensual dimension, transforming it from a symbol of decay into one of seduction and secrecy. The monster was no longer only a threat to livestock or lonely villagers. It had become a metaphor for desire itself, hidden, dangerous, intoxicating. And with Carmilla, the vampire claimed its first female form, showing that the terror could wear any face. Finally, in 1897, Bram Stoker's Dracula immortalized the vampire in a form the world would never forget. Count Dracula was the ultimate synthesis of every fear the centuries had shaped. Noble yet monstrous, ancient yet cunning, a creature of shadows feeding on the blood of bustling modern London. Stoker's vampire was not the swollen corpse of Medvegia's graveyard, yet the roots of Dracula reached straight back to Arnold Paole, the fear of contagion, the idea of spreading death, the image of a plague carried from victim to victim. What had been a village panic now became a global archetype. Through literature, the vampire evolved into a symbol far more complex than the revenant born from Eastern European soil. It represented aristocratic corruption, forbidden sexuality, the hidden dangers beneath the surface of civilized society. The fears of peasants had transformed into the fears of the elite. And from the salons of Europe to the pages of books read around the world, the vampire became something immortal. Not just a creature of folklore, but a shape-shifting reflection of whatever humanity feared most at any given moment.
The vampire has worn countless masks over the centuries, but beneath every retelling lies the same ancient fear that death is not a closed door. In Medvegia, the vampire was a soldier who died too suddenly. In Greece, it was the swollen, red-faced Vrikolikas haunting the night. In literature, it became aristocrats, seductresses, and immortal predators. And today, the vampire lingers in books, films, and the stories we whisper when the lights grow dim. But behind all these changing forms, the vampire remains a reflection of us, our anxieties, our desires, our relationship with mortality. For the villagers of Medvegia, the vampire explained what they could not understand: bodies that appeared too fresh in the grave, blood at the lips, sudden illness spreading through families. Without knowledge of decomposition, without modern medicine, they filled the gaps with ancient dread. What they saw in the coffins felt like proof, and fear shaped the rest. Yet even now, centuries later, science does not erase the emotional weight of their terror. The groan of escaping gas from a corpse, the darkening of skin, the seeming growth of nails or hair, these details feel eerie even with full explanation. The villagers did not mistake science. They simply interpreted the unknown with the tools they had. Their stories were not foolish, they were human. When Arnold Paole's grave was opened, when his body was staked and burned, when officials wrote reports that echoed across Europe, something extraordinary happened. A local fear became a legend became a case, and that case became the seed that shaped every vampire story told afterward. The transformation was astonishing, a frightened village's attempt to explain death gave rise to one of the most enduring monsters in history. Dracula's shadow stretches all the way back to the shallow graves of Serbia. Without Paole, without the panic that spread through Medvegia, the vampire, as we know it today, might never have existed. Arnold Paole himself was not a monster. He was a man caught in the web of fear, superstition, and misunderstanding. He became a symbol not by choice, but by circumstance. His grave was opened, his body was destroyed, his name whispered across Europe as the first official vampire. And though centuries have passed, his story still lingers like a candle flame, refusing to go out. The vampire endures because the fear behind it endures. We bury our dead, we mourn them, we wonder about what lies beyond the grave, and in those quiet moments, the same dread that haunted the villagers of Medvegia still brushes against our thoughts, the possibility that the grave is not the end. Tonight, we have traced Arnold Paole's journey from soldier to legend, from his mysterious curse to the epidemic that consumed his village, from the official reports that terrified Europe to the birth of the modern vampire. His story reminds us that our greatest monsters are not born from the darkness itself. They are shaped by our fear of it. And before we close this final page, I want to ask you something. If these forgotten histories, these strange legends, and these deeper shadows of our past are worth saving, if you want us to continue opening these dark archives, then keep the flame alive by liking this video and subscribing to the Midnight Archives. Your support keeps this candle burning so we can continue uncovering the stories that the world has almost forgotten. This file is closed, but the vampire's story is not. As long as we bury our dead, and as long as we fear what waits beyond the grave, the vampire will never fade.